Welcome to our next Driving Matters Vodcast series, produced by the Traffic Injury Research Foundation in partnership with Labatt. We all want our family and friends to come home safely every day, so we're discussing typical, risky situations we have all seen or encountered on the road. And we're also sharing tips to avoid risk and ways to positively influence the behavior of those around us. It features a variety of guests who are making roads safer in their communities and workplaces. We're tackling top risks, including speed, distraction, and impairment. We break down the science to explain how our choices every day can create risk for ourselves and others, meaning some people might not make it home. If you've never been involved in a collision, you might assume it's because you're doing everything right. But the truth is, the unexpected happens on the road every day, and the difference between a near miss and a collision is measured in millimeters and milliseconds. So if you're not prepared or simply fail to recognize the hazard in time, what could have been a near miss becomes a collision. So let's talk about why driving matters. Welcome to our Driving Matters 2.0 podcast, produced by the Traffic Injury Research Foundation in partnership with Labatt. So there's a lot of concern about distracted driving on their road. And while much of the focus is on distracted drivers, there's growing awareness that other types of road users, including pedestrians, are also distracted. So in today's episode, we're going to talk about some of the different types of distraction and how they affect our brain and our ability to drive. And we're also going to examine that belief many people have with respect to multitasking and explore whether or not it's true or it's just a myth. And most importantly, we're going to share strategies that everyone can use to avoid distractions while they're on the road and keep themselves safe. Joining us today, we have two guest experts who are going to contribute to our discussion. So first, I'd like to introduce JC Good, who is the founder of Hang Up and Drive, as well as Constable Stephen Panicook with the Victoria Police Department. So JC, let's start with you. Can you tell me why distraction is such an important issue for you?
It's such an important issue to me because it changed my life entirely. I lost both my parents and almost lost my own life at the hands of a driver who was distracted by his cell phone. I'm lucky enough to be here. I almost didn't survive, and I have lasting injuries that I will live with for the rest of my life, but I'm lucky to be able to share my story to try and affect change.
And we're certainly glad that you're able to do that with us today, JC. So Steve, you see a lot out on the road. Can you talk about the importance of distracted driving from your perspective?
For me, distracted driving is actually my number one thing I look for, just because it is just such a dangerous behavior. I mean, one of the stats I read was almost 1 in 4 fatal crashes involves distraction. And when I'm out there sometimes in plain clothes doing distracted driving operations, the amount of distracted drivers out there, whether not just phone, but everything from down to bowls of breakfast cereal, absolutely flabbergasts me. And then unfortunately, one of my other roles is to investigate those collisions, sometimes fatal or near fatal, that involve these things. And when I see that how easily avoidable it could be, it just gets right to my core.
So Robin, I think probably one of the things a lot of us are wondering about, compared to some of the issues out there, exactly how common is distracted driving?
I think judging by everyone's experiences on the road, we can say that distracted driving is fairly common. Significantly more Canadians are reporting distracted driving on the road today than they are 10 years ago. So if we think about the frequency of distracted driving, just in the past few years, we've seen a significant increase in the prevalence of handheld phone use. And more concerning, we've seen a 133% increase in texting and driving. Most concerning, almost 1 in 4 drivers report taking their eyes off the road for more than 2 seconds.
Well, I know that's definitely concerning to me. I don't know about you, Kylie, and Steve and JC. But I think also anecdotally speaking, I mean, I would challenge really just about anybody to look back over the past even just week of driving. to see whether or not, how many people they've seen out there engaging in some form of distraction behind the wheel. And when you look at the fact that really my ability as a driver is only one element of the issue of distracted driving in terms of risk, it's recognizing who I'm on the road with and the behaviors they're engaging in and how it can impact me. And JC, of course, you already spoke a little bit about that. What are some of the things that you're seeing that you would like to see less of?
Distraction almost never comes kind of in one form, as we talked about a little bit. You talk about taking your eyes off the road, but that's not only your eyes. If your eyes are off the road, your brain is probably involved somehow, and that cognitive distraction is what scares me so much. And the fact that, okay, we can say 1 in 4 of these car crashes on our roads are caused by distraction, but we also know every single number we've got regarding data related to distracted driving. It's underreported. It's so hard to keep track of these things because there's no breathalyzer for distraction for cell phones. So we don't really know how big this issue is, except that every number we've got is lower than what the reality is. So for me, it's about sharing this awful personal story that I was given, trying to relate to other people. I was in a high school in New Jersey this morning, just trying to make new friends and make them believe that they can be the power to change what happens on our roads.
A lot of the teens seem to feel that the finger's being pointed at them. And I think, Stephen, you can probably comment on that with the traffic stops that you're doing.
So it's a bit of a misnomer because a lot of the new drivers, while they're fairly inexperienced, are that much more aware of the issues of distracted driving. Enforcement-wise, I'm always flabbergasted because I always pick the riskiest areas. So usually what happens is I pick a construction zone, dress up as a construction worker. So these are people driving through road cones with workers while on an electronic device. And I will get up to their car, stand at their driver window, and generally they won't even know I'm there. And I'm kind of hard to miss. And in fact, just this morning, I dropped my truck off to get its tires fixed. And as I turn around, a car came towards me in the parking lot, and both the driver and passenger were heads down on their cell phones.
It's extremely concerning, and it really at any point on the road, but particularly in construction zones, and I would say school zones as a parent, those are probably two of the areas that I get most concerned about because they're busy doing their thing in the construction zone. They're working on infrastructure. The last thing they need to be worried about is a car coming at them because a driver's not paying attention to what's going on around them. And I know we've seen some real tragedies in construction zones. So do you change up your approach when you're doing enforcement in, say, a school zone, construction zone versus out on the highway or in a residential area?
Whenever jeopardy is increased, that definitely changes my tone. Although for me with distracted driving, like I do not give warnings to impaired drivers, and distracted drivers killed as many, if not some years more people than impaired driving. So to me, that's the same level. But if you're in a place, especially a construction zone, for your own welfare, let alone the workers, you have road cones that could be anywhere. You have debris, construction stuff. Everything is different than what you're accustomed to. So, and I love how JC put it in that it's not just your eyes on the road. Your eyes don't matter if your brain's not there. Your brain is the most important part of what you're driving. If your brain's not where it should be, which is focused on the road, there's no way you can be safe.
So what actually happens to your brain when you're driving distracted?
I don't like the term multitasking. What you're doing is task switching. Your brain is only capable of doing one thing at a time. So if I go down to my stereo controls, even for more than 2 seconds, my brain is no longer the picture of the road and everything and cross traffic, pedestrians, cyclists. So when your head comes back up, it will take 10 to 30 seconds to reacquire that picture. So even though you may think that you're good, your brain is still processing the visual information that it took a while ago, but you think it's happening now.
That makes a lot of sense. And JC, definitely for me as well, when you talked about the cognitive aspect of it, I'm not a scientist, so I don't have that kind of knowledge, but obviously I got really curious about this issue, especially once it affected Kylie, and I wanted to learn more about it. And it was interesting to me when I was first hit by a distracted driver when I was 19. He was actually a really nice fellow. He felt awful and came over, and to this day, I remember his words were, in addition to apologizing profusely, I didn't see you. I climbed in my car and I put the car in gear and I didn't put my brain in gear. And way back then, I didn't make that connection until I started working in this industry and learning about the cognitive element of distraction and the impact it can have on you. And to what you were saying, Stephen, about that the shrinkage of the field of view. So Transport Canada did a study specifically about field of view, and they have a driver all wired up, not on a cell phone, hands-free or handheld, and it creates this image of where the driver is actually looking as they're going down the road. Then they put the same driver in the same situation, but they're on a hands-free conversation, and just a benign one, and the field of view shrunk significantly. So one of the concerns for me, and what I'm passionate about trying to share with people, is what they don't know, which is just because your eyes are looking through the windshield and your hands might be on the steering wheel does not mean you're seeing everything around you. There's a big difference between looking where you're going and seeing where you're going.
Well, as a newer driver, when I was first really learning just the basics, as I feel like I've focused on everything, since everything is still so new, I'm still looking at the road, but my mind is thinking about everything I have to do in order to drive the vehicle. And then luckily, of course, I'm doing driving with an instructor in the car, so she's looking out for everything as well, but I will miss a whole vehicle. I can be looking at the road, but my mind's like, oh yeah, no, you have to do this, you have to press this button, you have to press on the gas, not too hard, and then your mind just shuts off, even if you're staring directly at the road, which is kind of horrifying.
Yeah. The number one thing I'd say I get told when I would pull someone over because they were at a red light, everyone really is detached at their brain, all the way down to I've even had discussions and brought some of your research forward to one of the traffic court justices because they thought that at a red light was not as dangerous. And I had to tell them it's actually more dangerous because we're at an intersection where the most is happening in cross traffic. And I know that study also looked at where drivers' eyes would look after looking away or thinking of something else. And they noticed even when their head came back up to engage with driving, it was a full 10 seconds before they started scanning left and right again. And that means that they're not aware of anyone else who's going to be running yellow lights, who's going to be distracted, my number one thing when I'm at a light, rather than think of something other than driving, is actually start looking around me to see who is a threat to me. Where is the distracted driver? Because odds are there's one somewhere around me in heavy traffic.
And I love that you shared all of that because that's what happened to me. As a young man talking on his phone, hands-free, he came to a red light and he stopped. He was looking out the windshield, he saw the red light, and then his brain just wasn't there. He's talking on the phone, paying more attention to that conversation, and then turned left through a red light, breaking the law, and unfortunately causing a collision that took the lives of two incredible people from this world.
I think the default position for a lot of drivers when the distracted driving laws were first introduced was that they were stopped at an intersection, so they felt that they were safer there instead of actually in a moving vehicle. But the laws have also been pretty clear. When you're still stopped at the intersection, you're still in control of your vehicle. So what is a conversation that you have with drivers you stop at a red light, Stephen?
Almost all collisions happen at intersections, and this is the place, especially downtown Victoria. Even some of you'll see those median panhandlers. We've had several of them hit because people, they go down to their electronic devices, their breakfast cereal, they're taking notes, they're reading newspapers, they're doing so many crazy things that people don't want to believe them. No, breakfast cereal is so common. But what it's happening is they're just not aware of that cyclist who's coming up on their right now. They're not aware of the person who's fallen over in front of their vehicle. Or if they were looking at a green light and their brain saw a green light and then their brain switched to a different task and it hasn't actually processed that light was red. So the brain still says, hey, it's green. And so they just keep going, and that's what their brain saw. And that's why I try to tell them, look, you need to be more heads up here, because we have to compensate for other people's bad day or their mistakes. Somebody's going to make a mistake and miss that light. Well, we have to catch it.
JC, we've had the opportunity to chat before, and I just want to reiterate, how sorry I am about you losing your parents. I can't even imagine. And the fact that you've taken that experience, not only what happened with your parents, but what you've been dealing with since then, and you're doing so much good with that. When we're talking about this issue, I'm going to toss you a question that the media often asks me, especially once they hear about what happened to Kylie, is when you see a distracted driver, do you have a reaction to that?
My reaction has shifted many times over the years. In the early days after surviving all of this, it made me so angry. I couldn't understand. I'm deep in the research, learning about how other people have, done the research to see what we actually know about the distracted brain. And it made me so angry that other drivers just ignored what I was learning, trying to share. And I think these days, it hurts. We're at a point in society where so many thousands and thousands of people have been killed or injured, whose lives are changed forever. And people plead ignorance. People think it won't happen to them. I guess I just have to tell myself, I haven't gotten to meet that person yet. They don't know what they're putting at risk. And for too many of us, that's kind of the case until you've been through something like this, or you know someone that this has happened to. For too many people, it's that sense of invisibility that we all need a wake-up call, and I can only hope they learn it farther removed from what I have had to live.
It definitely reinforces the importance of not only education and awareness, but the different approaches that are needed to education and awareness. Different people are motivated in different ways. And I'm sure, Steve, for you, perhaps the people you pull over, motivation might be linked to they're about to get a ticket. It's going to cost them a few bucks and there's going to be some consequences. But I wonder, Steve, if when you're pulling someone over for distracted driving, if the thought goes through your head, the fact that they're getting a ticket from you and you take that opportunity to chat with them about the fact that this ticket, although not welcome, could be the thing that actually stops them from facing further harm down the road to themselves or causing it to others.
I'm pretty passionate about education, and I'm fairly ruthless when it comes to impaired driving, distracted driving. But anytime someone's open to the conversation, I do have a pretty strong belief in it's a ticket or a lecture, never both. But anytime they show an interest in learning, I'm more than happy to discuss why and the reasons, especially when people are like, but I'm at a red light. And I take that as an opportunity to educate in the most friendly way. If to me, I've done my job right, is if I can hand someone that $600 ticket and they thank me for it. So if they all of a sudden realize, because if I want that behavior not to happen again, that's my main thing. It's not about handing fines out. It's about what do I have to do to stop that behavior?
Right. And I think that's perhaps one of the challenges. There's a lot of education campaigns around distracted driving with different types of messaging. And I think part of the challenge is maybe not all of us recognize exactly when we're distracted. We've seen in research studies, people often think that they're looking away for less than 2 seconds or just 2 seconds. And what the research shows is they're actually looking away for 4 and 5 seconds and more. So I think the challenge perhaps is how do we get people to self-diagnose, so to speak, and to recognize when they're distracted behind the wheel? And what do you think are some of the opportunities to get that message across to people to help them think more critically about their own driving behaviors?
We can take a lot of lessons from impaired driving and how much education and thought has gone into it. And we need to start applying that to the distracted world. Because I find most people, they seem to think they're safer because of lack of info. Generally, once I give them even some basic, like, even if you look away for that 5 seconds, well, now you have another 10 to 30 before you've got your picture. So I want you to look away from the road for 10 seconds and drive. And they're like, oh, there's no way. I'm like, hey, I want you to think about that. And for them, they don't have that education. So if we found a way to be able to provide that to more people, that would be really good. Nobody is okay with impaired driving. And that's doing something where your judgment's impaired. Your distracted driving's as dangerous, if not more, than impaired driving. And your judgment's not impaired. You're actually making a choice. So sometimes when I teach people that as well, they realize that there's even less of a possible excuse they could give anyone if they do something horrible, like cause a collision or take someone's life, just texting their friend. It's just not worth it. And then I also try to remind them that when you do pull over, don't do anything radical. Don't do a dangerous maneuver or put yourself in a dangerous place to take that call. Make sure you pull over and park safely.
So Robin, for those people who do make the choice to drive distracted, how many people suffer the consequence and are killed each year because of that choice?
So in 2017, we saw almost 500 Canadians were killed as a result of distracted driving. It's one of the significant contributors to crashes. Almost 1 in 4 crashes involve distraction as a contributing factor. And while for most road safety issues, males are more likely to represent a larger proportion when it comes to distracted driving. It's actually slightly more women involved in distracted driving fatal crashes. And I think the most important takeaway, perhaps, is that in an impaired driving collision, most often it's the impaired driver who is killed. And yet what we see in fatality data with distracted driving, it's actually the non-distracted road user who is more often killed. So we are literally, when we drive distracted, we are literally putting other people at risk.
And especially when you think about what you went through, JC, I mean, Robin has literally just described the reality of what your family suffered because of the choice of a distracted driver. They weren't the ones who were injured or lost their life. It was your parents who lost their lives, and it's you that was injured. And I look at it from a couple of different perspectives, and we already touched on how do we react when we see distracted drivers. The flip side to that is I'm curious, JC, about how do you react when you see a driver who is safely pulled over out of the flow of traffic, their vehicle is clearly in park, and they're on their phone? They've actually made the choice to recognize if they did this while they were driving, it would be unsafe. But you drive by and you see them and they're doing the right thing. I don't know about you, I almost want to pull over and just kind of give them a virtual hug just to say thank you. And if everybody could follow suit, it would be a much safer world out there.
Yes, and I don't pull over to do it, but if I'm a pedestrian and I see someone pulled over to use their phone, I will stop. I will knock on their window and thank them for keeping my life safe, for not putting me at risk because they needed to use their phone.
How have you found they've reacted to you doing that? I would imagine it would come as a bit of a surprise.
It is. They're always kind of taken aback, but then they are clearly on the same page as me. They understand the issue well enough to recognize that they are doing something positive.
I would imagine that the conversation they have when they get home, like, you'll never believe what happened. I'm doing this and this young lady comes up to thank me. I don't think that probably happens very often, but maybe if we were able to do that a bit more often and people got to see that it really is appreciated. When drivers make the safe choice, those of us who have suffered the consequences of unsafe choices by other drivers are inordinately appreciative when we see drivers making those safe choices, whether it's to pull over and not drive distracted or to not speed or any of those other risky behaviors. So I'm curious, Steve, about what you saw on the road pre-pandemic compared to during the pandemic. And I'd love to get to the point where I can say post-pandemic, but we're not there yet. But traffic volumes have started to return more to normal. Did you see a shift in driver behaviors with respect to distracted driving?
I found in the beginning of the pandemic, everyone was, we had that kind of honeymoon period where everyone was on their absolute best behavior. We had very few cars on the road. I didn't finding distracted drivers for the first time in my career ever was hard. And then as kind of people shifted through the different emotional and psychological phases, then some of those behaviors started coming back. People who were very stressed out in their lives started returning to that. And we're about now back to where we were, if not more. I find that I cannot take a trip in my vehicle anywhere without seeing a distracted driver. So it's amazing. And I just look down to my left and because I'm in a truck. And it's amazing how many people I see with electronic devices, especially when they think they're being sly, which is even worse to me because they know they're doing something wrong. Like the two today that literally drove up to me, passenger and driver distracted.
It really is hard to wrap your head around, and I think it definitely demonstrates between all of us represented around this virtual table today and the different organizations that we work with. There's still a lot more work to be done. There's a lot more education. I don't even know if it's possible to do more enforcement than you already do. I know you guys are kept really busy. And JC, you're obviously doing just amazing work out there, getting in front of crowds, hopefully a bit more in person now than virtually speaking, and just working on helping people make the connection between the choices they're making and the potential consequences of those choices.
Right. So I think JC and Steve, just listening to you talk, one of the important takeaways is how both of you have used your voice to influence the behavior of those around you. And I think that's an important takeaway for all Canadians. We are influenced by the people around us, by what they think, by what they believe, and by what they do. So if all of us could speak up to our peer group in terms of why we choose not to drive distracted, talk about the strategies we use, and how much we want to get home safely at the end of the day, then we can have a much stronger impact to change behaviors on the roads. So that concludes this episode of our podcast, Driving Matters 2.0. I'd like to thank JC and Steve for joining us and sharing their experiences and their information on this topic. And I'd also like to thank our sponsor, Labatt. So please join us for another episode of Driving Matters 2.0.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to our Driving Matters 2.0 Vodcast, produced in partnership with Labatt. TIRF is a registered Canadian charity with a number of free education programs about leading risks on the road, as well as ways to stay safe. They provide access to free fact sheets, infographics, and blogs to download and share. Start a conversation about the reasons you choose to avoid risks on the road. To learn more and access these free resources to support safer roads, visit www.tirf.ca. That's TIRF.ca. Working together, we can all help everyone to get home safe every day.